Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are taking a seriously fascinating journey. We're going to bridge the gap between those popular spiritual concepts you might find yourself reading about online late at night and rigorous academic neuroscience. Because, let's be honest here, how many of us have secretly wondered if our own weird, unexplainable personal quirks actually mean something more? Well, we are going to look at actual hard brain data that proves you aren't crazy. We're exploring the measurable science behind the unseen.
Let me kick things off with a kind of personal question. Do you frequently find yourself waking up right between 3 and 4 a.m. for literally no apparent reason, just staring up at the ceiling? Or perhaps you occasionally get these unexplained, prickly, tingling sensations all over your body. It's so easy to just write these things off, isn't it? We blame it on drinking way too much coffee, stress at work, or maybe just sleeping on a really bad mattress. But what if it's not the mattress? What if there's actually something far more profound happening right inside the neural pathways of your brain?
You know, you've probably stumbled across those lists on the internet with titles like 20 Signs You Might Be Spiritually Gifted. They talk about sudden, overwhelming surges of heightened empathy, hearing guided inner voices, or literal physical pressure right around your forehead, what people commonly call the third eye. They mention those unexplained prickly sensations we just talked about, or having really frequent lucid dreams. Now, it's incredibly tempting to just dismiss all of this as internet pop culture. But these lists, they are massively popular for a reason. People are absolutely desperate to make sense of these physical and mental anomalies. So today, we're going to look at a hypothesis that actually validates some of these very personal, often isolating experiences with hard academic data. So here is our roadmap for today. First, are you spiritually gifted? Second, the science of spontaneous awakenings. Third, the Kundalini difference. Next, measuring the mystical. And finally, the lucid dreaming gateway.
All right, let's jump right into part one. Are you spiritually gifted? Validating the unseen. Lately, you feel that you're somehow different. Something is seriously up, and you believe it's a type of spiritual gift. Man, that quote really captures a feeling so many people quietly harbor. You feel this shift, but you can't exactly explain it to your friends or family without sounding entirely disconnected from reality, right? So you just keep it to yourself, navigating this profound sense of isolation. I know this sounds a lot like lifestyle advice from a wellness blog, but what's truly compelling here is that researchers are finding a measurable reality behind these heightened sensitivities. People aren't just making these feelings up out of nowhere. They are undergoing legitimate neurological shifts in consciousness. Moving right along to section 2, the science of spontaneous awakenings, naming the phenomenon. So researchers over at the University of Greenwich have actually been rigorously studying these events using extensive clinical interviews and comprehensive surveys. They define spontaneous spiritual awakenings, or SSAs, as a sudden sense of direct contact, union, or merging with a perceived ultimate reality or the universe. Think about what that actually feels like for a second. It's a sudden, profound shift from feeling like an isolated individual just trying to survive in a stressful world to feeling totally united, interwoven, and at peace with everything around you. It perfectly maps onto that intense feeling of interconnectedness and deep empathy that those internet lists always mention. But there's another side to the spectrum, and this one gets super physical. Spontaneous Kundalini awakenings, or SKAs, are awakenings that also feature strong physical sensations. We aren't just talking about a peaceful shift in mindset anymore. We are talking about feeling powerful surges of energy shooting violently up the spine. We're talking about involuntary shaking, muscle spasms, and those mysterious, intense, prickly sensations. This really establishes that there's a real spectrum to these experiences. It moves all the way from the purely psychological tranquility of an SSA to the raw, visceral, and intensely physical reality of an SKA. Okay, so what actually triggers these sudden perspective shifts? While some happen completely without warning, just like a bolt from the blue, massive catalysts frequently set the stage. Get this. 52% of experiencers reported that psychological turmoil or trauma preceded their awakening. 47% cited intense meditation practice, and 32% pointed to engaging with deep spiritual literature. When you subject your mind to immense psychological stress or dive into deep, prolonged contemplative practices, you can essentially short-circuit the brain's default mode network. The stress, or the sheer silence, acts like a pressure cooker, frequently setting the stage for the brain to just undergo this profound, sudden leap in consciousness. Which brings us nicely to section 3, the Kundalini difference, unpacking the physical symptoms. When the researchers meticulously separated the data between the purely spiritual awakenings, the SSAs, and the Kundalini awakenings, the SKs, the contrast was incredibly revealing. SSAs score way higher in positive experiences. That peaceful merging, feelings of overwhelming bliss, and deep embodiment. But SKs, they have significantly higher involuntary positionings, intense physical symptoms, and notably short-term negative experiences. Let's ground this for a second. Imagine just going about your normal Tuesday and suddenly losing control of your physical posture while feeling raw electricity firing up your spine. You'd probably think you were having a severe medical emergency. So the absolutely crucial point here is that a Kundalini awakening can actually be quite terrifying. It perfectly validates why thousands of people might frantically search the internet for answers to their bizarre, unexplainable physical symptoms. And this brilliantly illustrates that it is not just all in their heads. Well, technically it's in their brains, but you know what I mean. When measuring for partial seizure-like symptoms using the Iowa Interview Scale, awakening experiencers scored significantly higher than the normal population. Specifically, they show measurable symptoms right in the temporal lobe of the brain. To break that down, your temporal lobe is the area responsible for processing emotions, integrating sensory input, and handling your memory. People undergoing these awakenings have a condition called temporal lobe lability. In simple, everyday terms, lability just means their neurons in that specific area are unusually active, highly sensitive, or just really sparky. They are biologically fundamentally processing reality differently. It beautifully bridges that gap between the deeply mystical and the strictly neurological. All right, on to Section 4, Measuring the Mystical, the Climax of Consciousness.
Now, what's really fascinating about this next part is when we measure these altered states of consciousness across 11 different dimensions, things like the experience of unity, bliss, insightfulness, and disembodiment, the results are staggering. We can look at altered states achieved through intense non-drug methods. For example, holotropic breathwork, which uses intense, rapid hyperventilation to induce an altered state, or sensory deprivation in flotation tanks. But look at this. The data representing spontaneous awakenings drastically exceeds all of these other methods in almost every single direction. Spontaneous awakenings absolutely blow traditional non-drug altered states out of the water when it comes to sheer, overwhelming intensity.
But you guys, here is the real wow moment, the absolute core hook of all this research. The researchers then compared spontaneous awakenings against heavy, intense psychedelic trips using classical psychedelics like DMT and psilocybin. The phenomenological distribution is nearly identical. Actually, scratch that, the completely sober spontaneous awakening sometimes scored even higher on feelings of spiritual experience, blissful state, and profound insightfulness. Let that sink in for a second. We are visually proving here that a completely sober human brain can spontaneously generate an experience as intense, and sometimes even more intense, than a heavy dose of the most powerful psychedelics known to science. It's a staggering reality about the immense power locked right inside human consciousness.
Now, with an experience that incredibly intense and sometimes physically terrifying, like we saw with the Kundalini events, you would probably think it leaves people completely psychologically damaged, right? Well, check out this absolutely incredible statistic, 98%. Despite the initial shock and the intense physical upheaval, 98% of people who went through these spontaneous awakenings reported that the experience had a predominantly positive impact on their long-term mental well-being. It acts like a profound, fundamental hard reset for the brain. Following these events, people frequently overhaul their entire lives. They walk away from toxic relationships. They shift their career paths. They report massively increased empathy, find deeper meaning in daily life, and experience a dramatic, permanent reduction in existential fears, especially the fear of death. So if these states are so incredibly beneficial, but spontaneous awakenings are totally unpredictable, how can we actually tap into them safely? That brings us to Section 5, the Lucid Dreaming Gateway, your access point. Let's circle back to something highly accessible that we mentioned right at the start, in our very first pop culture list, lucid dreaming. Tadas Stumbries, who is a prominent researcher specializing in dream consciousness, refers to the relationship between lucid dreaming and spirituality as the luminous night of the soul. I just love this quote because it lends some serious academic weight to a deeply poetic idea. It completely reframes lucid dreaming. It's not just some parlor trick or a fun way to practice flying over a city while you sleep. It is a profound, accessible, and deeply spiritual tool. And science totally backs up this profound connection. People who have a high frequency of lucid dreams and people who actively cultivate mystical experiences within those dreams show a strong, positive association with overall spiritual transcendence in their waking lives.
actively cultivating these experiences means not just realizing you're dreaming and goofing around, but using that lucid state to ask the big, deep questions. You might intentionally try meditating within the dream, or literally ask the dream environment to show you something profound about yourself. The more you practice this active awareness and inquiry in the dream state, the more your waking consciousness radically expands. So, what's the big takeaway from this whole explainer? Why does this matter to you? Well, lucid dreaming is a scientifically viable, secular spiritual practice that fosters deep spiritual growth. You basically have a free, built-in virtual reality headset for spiritual exploration that activates every single night. It empowers you with a safe, actionable method to explore the exact same non-dual states of consciousness we've been talking about this whole time, all without the terrifying shock or the violent physical upheaval of a spontaneous Kundalini awakening. It really is your very own personal laboratory for human consciousness. We have covered a lot of ground today. We've journeyed all the way from late-night internet spirituality lists to the sparky neurons of temporal lobe neurology. We've mapped the absolute peaks of human consciousness, and we found a safe gateway that you can use while you are fast asleep. So, armed with this incredible science of altered states and knowing the immense power locked inside your own mind, what will you discover in your own dreams tonight?